I can still hear the sound of her laughter. Not the warm, genuine kind I used to love, but sharp, careless laughter, the kind that makes your stomach drop before your brain even registers what's happening. I don't know why this time felt different. Maybe because it wasn't the first time. Maybe because it happened in front of people. Or maybe because, deep down, I knew this moment had been coming for a long time. I didn't argue. I didn't try to defend myself. I just stood up, pushed my chair back, and walked out. And just like that, everything changed. My name is Eldrick. I'm 36 years old, and until last night, I thought I was happily married to my wife, Sylvain. We've been together for 12 years, married for 7. If you'd asked me a week ago, I would have told you she was my best friend, my partner, the person I trusted most in the world. But now, sitting alone in a hotel room with a half-packed suitcase and a phone that won't stop buzzing with her messages, I'm realizing that trust had been misplaced. I guess I should start from the beginning. Sylvain and I met in graduate school. She was a force of nature, brilliant, charming, impossible to ignore. When she walked into a room, people noticed. She had this effortless confidence, the kind that made you feel lucky just to be in her orbit. And me? I was steady, grounded, the guy who made sure everything stayed on track while she reached for the stars. I loved that about her. I still do, in some ways. But over the years, something shifted. The playful teasing turned into something sharper. The admiration in her voice when she spoke about me faded, replaced with something closer to indifference. And last night, she didn't even try to hide it. We were at a dinner party hosted by one of her colleagues. The kind of event where people sip expensive wine and try to impress each other with their latest achievements. I never enjoyed these gatherings, but I went because she asked me to. Because that's what a supportive husband does. The night had been fine, awkward small talk, polite laughter, until someone made a comment about relationships. About how a strong marriage required mutual respect. That's when Sylvain laughed. Not a small chuckle, not a teasing nudge. A full, unrestrained laugh, like someone had just told the best joke of the evening. She turned to me, eyes glinting, and said, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. Respect? Please. I adore Eldrick, but let's be honest, he's not exactly the strong, take-charge type. He's comfortable. Safe. The table fell silent. Someone let out an awkward chuckle, but most people just shifted in their seats, looking anywhere but at me. I could feel the heat creeping up my neck, the tightness in my chest. I should have said something. I should have laughed it off or made a witty comeback. That's what she expected. That's what I always did. But this time, I couldn't. Because in that moment, I realized something that had been gnawing at me for years. She didn't respect me. Not really. She loved me in the way you love an old sweater, comfortable, familiar, something you keep around because it's easy. And I couldn't be that anymore. So I stood up. I didn't look at her. I didn't look at anyone. I just pushed back my chair, grabbed my coat, and walked out. She didn't follow me. Not right away. But now, as I stare at my phone, watching her name flash across the screen over and over, I know she's trying to fix it. To explain. To smooth things over like she always does. But this time, I don't think I can be smoothed over. Because I'm not sure there's anything left to fix. I didn't check my phone for hours after leaving the dinner party. I drove with no destination in mind, my fingers gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The words kept repeating in my head, her voice, that laugh, the way she had looked at me, as if I were something small, something lesser. He's comfortable. Safe. The words shouldn't have stung so much, but they did. They carried the weight of every offhand comment, every dismissive glance, every time she'd subtly put me down in front of our friends and laughed it off as a joke. How long had this been happening? And more importantly, how long had I been pretending not to notice? I pulled into an empty parking lot outside an all-night diner. The neon, open sign flickered in the window, casting a dull red glow across the cracked asphalt. It wasn't my first choice, but I needed somewhere to sit and think. Somewhere that wasn't her home. As soon as I stepped inside, I was hit by the familiar scent of burnt coffee and frying bacon. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers at the counter and an old man nursing a cup of coffee in the corner. I slid into a booth near the window and stared at my reflection in the glass. I barely recognized myself. I looked exhausted. Not just from tonight, but from years of something I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. The quiet erosion of my confidence. The way I had slowly adapted to being treated like an afterthought. A waitress came by, her tired eyes scanning me for a second before she gave me a knowing nod. Rough night. I let out a breath and nodded. She poured me a cup of coffee without asking, then slid a menu in front of me. Whatever it is, I'd say it's nothing a plate of pancakes can't fix. I forced a small smile. I'll take your word for it. She left me alone, and for the first time all night, I let myself think about what came next. Was I really considering leaving? It felt surreal. My entire life with Sylvain had been built on stability, on the belief that, no matter what, we were a team. But the more I sat there, the more I realized I was the only one holding us together. And if she didn't respect me, then what were we, really? The first call. By the time my phone buzzed for the 10th time, I knew I couldn't ignore it forever. I picked it up, staring at Sylvain's name on the screen. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but at the last second, I pressed answer. I didn't say anything. Neither did she at first. All I could hear was her breathing, slightly uneven. Then, finally, "Eldrick," she said. Her voice was softer than usual. "Where are you?" I took a slow sip of my coffee before answering. "Somewhere I can think." There was a long pause. Then, "Are you coming home?" I closed my eyes. I could picture her sitting on the couch, biting her lip, waiting for me to say yes. Waiting for me to brush this under the rug like I always did. "I don't know," I said finally. "Depends. Are you going to explain why you thought humiliating me in front of your colleagues was funny?" Sylvain sighed. "Eldrick, it was a joke." I clenched my jaw. "A joke?" "Yes, a joke. You know I didn't mean anything by it. Everyone was laughing. You just took it the wrong way." I let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "You think I took it the wrong way?" Her voice sharpened. "Well, yeah. Because if you actually think I don't respect you, then you're being ridiculous. You know I love you." That word, ridiculous. I had spent years being called ridiculous whenever I brought up something that upset me. Every time I voiced a concern, every time I asked for more from her, I was being too sensitive, too dramatic, overreacting. I used to believe it. Now, I wasn't so sure. "If you really respected me, Sylvain, you wouldn't have said it." Another pause. "You're really making a big deal out of nothing," she muttered. I could hear it in her tone, the frustration, the expectation that I'd just get over it, that I'd apologize for being too sensitive and let her off the hook. And for the first time in years, I didn't want to let her off the hook. "I need some space," I said. "Eldrick." I hung up. The truth that was always there. I stayed at the diner for another hour, staring into my coffee like it held the answers I was looking for. Maybe, in a way, it did. Because the longer I sat there, the clearer things became. This wasn't just about last night. This was about every time I had brushed things off. Every time I had let her words slide because I didn't want to start a fight. Every time I had convinced myself that being loved was enough, even if I wasn't respected. I had spent so much time making excuses for her that I hadn't noticed what I was losing in the process. My confidence. My self-worth. Myself. For the first time in years, I asked myself the question I had been too afraid to consider. Was I really happy in this marriage? And for the first time, I didn't like the answer. The message that changed everything. I was about to leave the diner when my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a call. It was a message. From someone I never expected. My best friend, Cashin. "Eldrick, I need to talk to you. It's about Sylvain. And I need to tell you before she does." I felt my stomach drop. Before she does? What the hell did that mean? I stared at the message, my mind racing. Every possible scenario played through my head, none of them good. Whatever it was, I had a feeling this night was about to get a whole lot worse. The moment I saw Cashin's message, my pulse quickened. My hands felt clammy against the phone, my stomach twisting with unease. The words, "I need to tell you before she does," played over and over in my mind like an alarm I couldn't shut off. What could he possibly mean? Cashin and I had been best friends since college. He was the one person who had always had my back, the one who saw me at my best and my worst and never judged me for either. If he was reaching out like this, it had to be serious. I hesitated for a moment before typing a reply. "What's going on?" His response came almost instantly. "Not over text. Can we meet?" I looked at the time, just past midnight. The diner was nearly empty now, the waitress giving me the occasional glance like she was debating whether to check on me again. I drained the last of my coffee and made up my mind. "Yeah. Where?" "My place." Now. I didn't need to think twice. I left some cash on the table, grabbed my coat, and headed for the door. The drive to Cashin's apartment felt longer than usual. My mind raced through every possible explanation for his message, but none of them made sense. Was Sylvain in trouble? Did she do something I didn't know about? Or Did she already know I had left the party and was trying to spin the story before I could? By the time I pulled into the parking lot outside Cashin's building, I was gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I killed the engine, took a deep breath, and headed upstairs. When I knocked on his door, it swung open almost immediately. Cashin stood there, his expression tense, his usual easygoing nature replaced by something I couldn't quite place. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. I walked past him into the apartment, which was dimly lit except for a single lamp in the corner. He closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a second, rubbing the back of his neck like he was trying to figure out how to start. "Cass, just tell me what's going on," I said, my patience wearing thin. He let out a slow breath. "It's about Sylvain," he said. I swallowed hard. "Yeah, I figured that much. But what about her?" Cashin hesitated for a moment, then walked past me and grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the counter. He poured himself a glass, then glanced at me. "You want one?" "No," I said. "I want answers." He sighed, swirling the liquid in his glass. "Look, man." I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but after what happened tonight, I can't keep quiet anymore. Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. "Keep quiet about what?" Cashin looked me straight in the eye. "Sylvain's been talking to someone else." I felt like the floor had just dropped out from under me. My first instinct was to deny it, to push back. But I knew Cashin. He wouldn't say something like this unless he had proof. "What do you mean, talking to someone else?" I asked carefully. He exhaled through his nose. "I mean exactly what it sounds like. I don't know how far it's gone, but I've seen messages, Eldrick. Flirty texts. Late-night calls. The way she acts when she thinks no one's looking." He hesitated, then added, "And it's not just anyone. It's someone from her work." I took a step back like he had physically hit me. Her work. The same place where she had laughed at me in front of her colleagues. The same people she had wanted to impress at the dinner party. The same world she had slowly started prioritizing over me. It suddenly made too much sense. "Who?" My voice was hoarse. Cashin looked at me with something almost like pity. "Eldrick, you don't want to know." "Yes, I do." He clenched his jaw, and then said the name that made my blood run cold. Jareth. Jareth. Sylvain's boss. The man she always talked about with admiration, the one she seemed to respect more than anyone else. The one she compared me to without even realizing it. I let out a shaky breath. "How long?" Cashin hesitated. "I don't know for sure. But a few months, at least. Maybe longer. A few months." While I had been killing myself trying to be the supportive husband, the understanding one, the reliable one, she had been turning to someone else. And I had been too blind to see it. A bitter laugh escaped me. "So that joke tonight, when she called me safe, she was already gone, wasn't she?" Cashin didn't answer. He didn't have to. I turned away, gripping the back of a chair to steady myself. My mind was a mess, a storm of anger, betrayal, and something I didn't even have a name for. But one thing was suddenly crystal clear. I wasn't going back home. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. The weight of Cashin's words sat heavy in my chest, pressing down like a boulder I couldn't move. My hands tightened around the back of the chair, my knuckles white with tension. My mind was racing, flashes of memories, conversations, little moments that I had ignored suddenly clicking into place like pieces of a puzzle I had been too blind to see before. Sylvain. Jareth. Months. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. "How do you know?" Cashin sighed, setting his glass down on the counter. "I saw the messages on her phone. That caught me off guard." "When?" 2 weeks ago, he admitted. "She left her phone on the table at that rooftop bar when we all went out for drinks after her promotion. I wasn't trying to snoop, man, but she got a notification, and I saw his name. It was just a preview of the message, but it was enough." I gritted my teeth. "What did it say?" Cashin hesitated, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "It was something like, 'Last night was amazing. I can still feel you.'" The words hit me like a gut punch. "Last night was amazing. I can still feel you." My grip on the chair tightened. My vision blurred for a moment, anger and hurt flooding my system all at once. This wasn't just emotional betrayal. This wasn't just some inappropriate flirting. This was physical. My wife, had been with another man. I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to stay in control. "You saw this 2 weeks ago. Why didn't you tell me then?" Cashin looked guilty. "Because I wasn't sure what to do, Eldrick. I mean, it was one message. I didn't know how bad it was. I didn't want to wreck your marriage over something I wasn't completely sure about." He shook his head. "But tonight, when I saw the way she talked about you, The way she laughed at you in front of everyone. I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Does she know you know? No, Cashin said. I never confronted her. But I started paying attention. I noticed the way she kept her phone face down whenever you were around. The way she always had some excuse to stay late at work. And the way he cut himself off, hesitating. I narrowed my eyes. The way she what? Cashin sighed heavily. The way she talks about you when you're not there. I stiffened. What do you mean? He hesitated again, but when I didn't back down, he finally said, she complains about you, Eldrick. A lot. Like, a lot. She makes it seem like you're just some guy she's stuck with. Like she settled. I've heard her say stuff like, Eldrick's a good husband, but he's not exciting. Or, I love him, but I need more. My stomach twisted. I had spent years believing we were a team, that our marriage was built on mutual love and understanding. But if what Cashin was saying was true, if Sylvain had been speaking about me this way for months, maybe longer, then what did that say about everything we had built together? Had I been nothing more than a placeholder to her? A safety net while she searched for something better? I felt sick. I pushed back from the chair and ran a hand over my face, trying to clear my thoughts. I need some air, I muttered. Cashin didn't stop me as I stepped out onto his balcony. The night air was cold, but I barely felt it. The city stretched out below me, lights twinkling in the distance, but all I could focus on was the chaos inside my own mind. I pulled out my phone and stared at the unread messages from Sylvain. Sylvain, Eldrick, come home. Please. Sylvain, I didn't mean it like that. It was just a joke. Sylvain, can we talk? Sylvain, why aren't you answering? I should have felt something reading her words. Anger, sadness, anything, but all I felt was numb. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my messages and typed out a new one. To Sylvain, I know about Jareth. I stared at the words for a long moment before hitting send. Less than a minute later, my phone started ringing. Her name flashed across the screen. I let it ring. She called again. And again. Finally, after the fourth attempt, she sent a message. Sylvain, Eldrick, whatever you think you know, it's not what it seems. Please just come home so we can talk. Not what it seems. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course she'd say that. Of course she'd try to spin it. But for the first time in years, I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses. I turned my phone off, shoved it into my pocket, and walked back inside. Cashin was watching me carefully, as if trying to gauge what I was thinking. I met his gaze and said the words I never thought I'd say. I think my marriage is over. I didn't sleep that night. After turning off my phone, I sat in Cashin's living room, staring at the wall while he paced around, occasionally stealing glances at me like he was afraid I'd break down. But I didn't. I just felt empty. At some point, Cashin stopped pacing and sat across from me. What are you going to do? He asked quietly. I let out a slow breath. I don't know. It was the truth. I had spent the last 11 years of my life building something with Sylvain, believing in the illusion of us, only to find out that I was the only one holding up that foundation. Now that the truth was out, I had no idea what came next. Do you still love her? Cashin asked. The question hit me like a gut punch. Did I? I had loved Sylvain for so long that the idea of not loving her felt impossible. But the woman I fell in love with, the woman who used to look at me like I was the best thing that had ever happened to her, wasn't the same woman who had laughed at me in front of a room full of people. She wasn't the same woman who had been sneaking around with Jareth behind my back. And maybe I wasn't the same man, either. I don't know, I admitted, rubbing my hands over my face. I think I love who she used to be. Or maybe who I thought she was. Cashin nodded slowly, as if he understood. So what now? Are you going to confront her? That was the question, wasn't it? Part of me wanted to drive home, slam the door open, and demand answers. I wanted to see the look on her face when she realized she couldn't lie her way out of this. I wanted to hear her say the words out loud, to confirm what I already knew. But another part of me, the part that was exhausted, the part that felt like a man who had been carrying too much for too long, wasn't sure if I even cared to hear her excuses. Maybe the moment I walked out of that dinner party, it was already over. I let out a humorless chuckle. You know what's funny? I said, shaking my head. I thought we were solid. I thought, even when things weren't perfect, we were still a team. Cashin gave me a sad look. You were a team. She just wasn't on it. The words stung, but they were the truth. I exhaled slowly, my mind made up. I need to go home. Not to talk. Just to get my things. Cashin nodded, grabbing his keys. I'm driving you. We barely spoke on the drive to my house. I could feel the tension in my chest tightening with every mile, my body bracing for whatever was waiting for me when I walked through that door. Sylvain had called me a dozen times before I turned my phone off. If she was awake, she was probably waiting, rehearsing whatever explanation she had prepared. If she was asleep, well, I'd rather not see her at all. When we pulled up to the house, the lights were still on. Cashin glanced at me. Want me to come in? I thought about it, then shook my head. No, I need to do this alone. He hesitated but nodded. I'll wait here. I stepped out of the car, took a deep breath, and walked up to the front door. My keys felt heavier than usual as I slid them into the lock. The door opened with a soft click. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No TV, no music, just quiet. Then I saw her. Sylvain was sitting on the couch, wearing one of my old hoodies, her knees pulled up to her chest. The moment she saw me, she shot up like she had been waiting for hours. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy like she had been crying. Eldrick, she breathed, stepping toward me. Thank God. I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. Don't. She flinched. Please, just let me explain. I exhaled through my nose. Explain what? That you've been seeing Jareth? That you've been lying to me for months? Or that I was the idiot who didn't see it sooner? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her hands clenched at her sides. It's not like that, she said quickly. I never meant to it. Don't. My voice was quiet, but firm. Just don't. Sylvain swallowed hard. I still love you, Eldrick. I do. I laughed. A dry, bitter sound. You love me? Really? Is that what you were thinking when you were with him? When you texted him after whatever you two did together? Her face crumpled. I messed up. Yeah, I said. You did. She took a step closer, her eyes pleading. But we can fix this. I swear. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll cut him off. I'll quit my job if you want me to. Just don't leave. I stared at her, trying to feel something, anger, sadness, anything, but all I felt was emptiness. She was finally saying the words I had been waiting to hear for years. And it was too late. I shook my head. I didn't leave because of Jareth, Sylvain. I left because I finally realized you don't respect me. You haven't for a long time. Her eyes widened. That's not true. It is, I cut her off. And the worst part? I let it happen. I kept making excuses for you. I told myself you didn't mean it, that I was overreacting, that you still loved me. But love without respect means nothing. Tears filled her eyes. So what does this mean? She whispered. I let out a slow breath. It means I'm done. She made a choked sound. You don't mean that. I do. Silence stretched between us. I turned away, heading toward the bedroom to grab my bag. I had packed it at Cashin's, but there were still a few things I needed. Clothes. Important documents. Anything I wasn't willing to leave behind. When I returned to the living room, she was still standing there, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. I paused at the door, looking at her one last time. Take care, Sylvain. Her face crumpled. Eldrick, please. I walked out. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The cold air hit my face as I stepped outside, but it did nothing to numb the storm raging inside me. I walked down the driveway in slow, measured steps, each one taking me farther away from the life I had built with Sylvain. Cashin was still parked at the curb, leaning against his car with his arms crossed, watching me like he already knew what had happened inside. I didn't say anything as I approached. I just opened the passenger door and slid into the seat, throwing my bag onto the floor. Cashin got in a moment later, turning the key in the ignition. The hum of the engine filled the silence between us. So, he said finally, his voice low, careful. That's it. I stared straight ahead, watching my house. No, her house now, fade into the distance as we pulled away. My stomach twisted, but I didn't let myself look back. Yeah, I said. That's it. Cashin let out a slow breath. Damn. I ran a hand over my face, exhaustion creeping in now that the adrenaline had started to wear off. The weight of everything hit me at once. 11 years together, 8 years of marriage, a lifetime of memories that now felt tainted. I had walked out of my home with nothing but a bag of clothes and a handful of important documents. Everything else, our furniture, our wedding photos, the little inside jokes we used to share, stayed behind. And yet, somehow, I felt lighter than I had in years. Cashin didn't press me for details, and for that, I was grateful. We drove in silence, the city lights flashing past, the roads mostly empty at this hour. You want to crash at my place? He asked eventually. I shook my head. I think I just need to be alone for a bit. Cashin nodded. Makes sense. We stopped outside a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, flickering neon sign, an empty parking lot, the faint smell of cigarettes lingering in the air, but it would do. Cashin pulled out his wallet. Let me cover. I got it, I said, already reaching for my own. He didn't argue. I checked in, got my key, and turned back to face him. He looked like he wanted to say something, but instead, he just clapped a hand on my shoulder. If you need anything, call me. I will. He hesitated for a second. You gonna be okay? I exhaled slowly. I have no idea. Cashin gave a small nod, then got back in his car. I watched as he pulled away, his taillights disappearing down the road. Then, for the first time in years, I was truly alone. The motel room was exactly what I expected: dim lighting, stained carpets, the faint hum of a vending machine outside the door. I tossed my bag onto the bed and sat down heavily, rubbing my temples. Everything felt surreal. This morning, I had woken up in my own bed, next to my wife, in a life that felt stable, even if it had cracks I had ignored. Now I was here, alone, starting over. I let out a slow breath and pulled out my phone. I had turned it back on in the car, and now it buzzed relentlessly with unread messages. Sylvain's name filled the screen. Sylvain, Eldrick, please come back. I need to talk to you. Sylvain, I know you're upset, but you can't just walk away from everything we've built. Sylvain, this isn't fair. We need to fix this. Sylvain, are you really throwing away our marriage over one mistake? One mistake. I clenched my jaw. It wasn't one mistake. It was months of lying, of disrespect, of treating me like I was less. I scrolled further. A new message popped up. Sylvain, you're being dramatic. We can move past this. Dramatic. The same word she had used every time I voiced a concern, every time I asked for more from her. I shut off my phone and threw it onto the nightstand. Lying back on the bed, I stared at the ceiling, my mind refusing to quiet down. I thought of every fight we'd had, every moment I had dismissed my own feelings because it was easier than arguing. And then I thought about what came next. For the first time in a long time, I didn't know. I woke up to the sound of knocking. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. But then it came again, louder, more insistent. I groggily sat up, glancing at the clock. 6:12 a.m. Who the hell? Another knock. I swung my legs over the bed, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and made my way to the door. Peering through the peephole, my stomach dropped. Sylvain. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether to pretend I wasn't here. But she knocked again, this time calling out. Eldrick, I know you're in there. Please open the door. I exhaled through my nose. There was no avoiding this. I unlocked the door and pulled it open, staring at her. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her hair messy like she hadn't slept. I didn't say anything. She swallowed. Can I come in? I leaned against the doorframe. Why? Because we need to talk. I crossed my arms. We did talk. I told you I was done. Tears welled up in her eyes. You don't mean that. I let out a slow, tired breath. Sylvain, just go home. She shook her head. No, I can't just let you walk away like this. We have a life together. We have. She stopped, biting her lip, her shoulders shaking. I wanted to feel something seeing her like this. But I didn't. Not anger, not sadness, not regret. Just nothing. Finally, she whispered, Do you still love me? I stared at her for a long moment. Then, in the quietest voice I had ever used, I said, I don't know. She let out a small, broken sound. For years, I had been the one holding us together, the one forgiving, the one making it work. But now, standing here, looking at her, I didn't know if there was anything left to hold on to. Sylvain stood in the doorway, her breath uneven, her fingers twitching at her sides like she wanted to reach for me, but didn't know if she should. I didn't move. I didn't invite her in. The air between us felt thick, filled with all the unspoken words we had ignored for years. She took a slow step forward. Eldrick, please, she whispered. Let me in. A few months ago, I would have. Hell, even a few days ago, I would have. I would have let her talk her way out of this, convince me that I was overreacting, that we could fix things if I just tried harder. But I wasn't that man anymore. I let out a slow breath. Why are you here, Sylvain? Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. Then she shook her head, frustrated. Because this isn't how we end. I raised an eyebrow. Oh? And how are we supposed to end? She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. We aren't supposed to end at all. I let out a bitter chuckle, stepping back just enough to put more distance between us. You don't get to decide that. Eldrick, come on, she pleaded. You're really going to throw away everything we've built? Over one mistake? There it was again. One mistake. I exhaled sharply through my nose, forcing myself to stay calm. Do you honestly believe that's what this is about? She blinked, caught off guard. This isn't just about Jareth, I cut in. It's about the years of disrespect. The jokes at my expense. The way you stopped seeing me. The way you talk about me when I'm not around. Sylvain's lips pressed together, her shoulders tensing. Who told you that? I shook my head. It doesn't matter. It does, she snapped, her voice rising. Because someone is obviously trying to ruin us. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. No, you ruined us. Her breath hitched, and for a second, just a second, I saw real pain flash across her face. But she recovered quickly, her expression hardening. You're making a mistake, she said, quieter now. You're throwing this away without even giving us a chance to fix it. I studied her carefully. And if I had been the one who cheated? If I had been sneaking around with someone from work, texting them late at night, lying to you for months, would you be standing here right now, asking me to fix it? Silence. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her jaw clenched. I nodded slowly. That's what I thought. The truth was, I had spent years giving Sylvain the benefit of the doubt. I had let things slide, ignored the signs, convinced myself that love was enough. But standing here, looking at her now, I realized something. Love wasn't enough. Not when respect was gone. Not when trust had been shattered. Not when I had spent years feeling like I wasn't enough for my own wife. She took a shaky breath. I don't want to lose you. I exhaled slowly. You already did. Her lips trembled. For the first time since this started, she looked scared. Truly, deeply scared. Like she hadn't actually believed I would leave until this moment. A beat of silence stretched between us. Then, in the softest voice, she asked, So this is it? I nodded once. Her breath shuddered. Her hands curled into fists. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. I watched her go, her figure disappearing into the early morning light. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt free. I didn't go back to sleep. Instead, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the wall, letting the weight of everything settle in. I had walked away from an 11-year relationship, a marriage, a life I had spent years building. But had I really walked away? Or had I just finally acknowledged that she had been walking away from me for a long time? My phone buzzed. I debated ignoring it, but something told me to check. It wasn't Sylvain. It was Cashin. Cashin, hey, how'd it go? I hesitated, then typed out a simple reply. Me, it's over. A moment later, my phone buzzed again. Cashin, good. You okay? I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. Me, I don't know yet. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure how to be okay. But for the first time in years, I was ready to find out. The hours after Sylvain left felt strange. Like I was floating through a life that no longer belonged to me. I sat in the motel room, staring at the walls, listening to the hum of the vending machine outside, feeling the weight of everything settle into my bones. It was over. Really, truly over. And yet, there was no great sense of relief, no triumphant moment of clarity. Just a quiet, hollow space where my marriage used to be. I had spent years building my life around Sylvain, making excuses for her, trying to be the man she wanted me to be. And in the end, I had been nothing more than a convenience. Something stable, something safe. And now? Now I had to figure out who I was without her. My phone buzzed again, but I ignored it. I already knew it wasn't Sylvain. She had gone silent after walking away, and I had no desire to reach out. Instead, I grabbed my bag, checked out of the motel, and drove. Not home, not to Cashin's, just anywhere. By the time the sun was fully up, I found myself parked by a small roadside diner, the kind with faded curtains and a neon sign that buzzed faintly in the morning light. It wasn't much, but it was open, and right now, I needed something to do with my hands. The bell jingled as I stepped inside. A waitress in her late 50s glanced up from behind the counter, giving me a once-over before pouring a fresh cup of coffee and setting it on the counter. Rough night? She asked, her voice raspy from years of smoking. I let out a small chuckle, sliding into the booth. Something like that. She nodded knowingly, like she had seen men like me before, tired, worn out, sitting in diners at dawn with the weight of something heavy on their shoulders. I took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth burn down my throat. It was bitter, cheap, exactly what I needed. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to sit in the silence, to breathe, to exist without trying to fix something that was already broken. Cashin showed up later that afternoon. I hadn't told him where I was, but I wasn't surprised he found me. He slid into the booth across from me without a word, signaling the waitress for his own coffee. We sat in silence for a while, just drinking, just being. Then, finally, he spoke. So what now? I exhaled slowly. I don't know. Cashin nodded, like he had expected that answer. You gonna go back to the house? The thought made my stomach twist. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I get that. He sipped his coffee. You can crash at my place for as long as you need. I gave him a small, tired smile. Thanks, man. He nodded. And just like that, it was decided. I didn't know what came next. I didn't have some grand plan, some perfect roadmap for how to rebuild my life. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going back. Not to Sylvain. Not to the life where I had been a second thought, a safety net, a joke. For the first time in years, I was free. And even though I had no idea where I was going, I was finally ready to start moving forward.